HighBridge, a division of recorded books, presents The Last Job, The Bad Grandpas, and The Hatton Garden Heist by Dan Bilefsky, read by Chris Macdonnell. We done the best bit of work of the whole century. The whole fucking century. Terry Perkins. Prologue. Just another retiree on a bus. The largest burglary in the history of England began on a bus. On the Thursday evening before Easter and Passover, April 2nd, 2015, as the sun began to set, Brian Reeder, a baggy-eyed 76-year-old pensioner, boarded the number 96 bus near his grand red-brick home in Dartford, Kent. His house was about 20 miles away from central London and more than an hour by public transportation. No matter. Reeder decided to take the bus. A career thief with a ruddy face, a quick temper, and plenty of cunning, taking the bus would give him a chance to catch up on the papers and the time to think. Time was something that was not in short supply these days, since he was semi-retired. He had likely calculated that driving his own car to a jewel heist was probably not a good idea. And if London's ubiquitous black taxi drivers were able to memorize 25,000 streets and 20,000 landmarks, they could surely remember his world-weary face. Besides, he hated to waste money, and taxis were expensive. For those harried fellow commuters who saw Reeder on that double-decker bus, he must have looked like just another ordinary pensioner with a sullen, permanent scowl. If only they knew that what he was about to attempt was anything but ordinary. Just hours before Reeder had stepped on that bus, the jewellers of Hatton Garden had been arriving in droves at the Hatton Garden Safe Deposit Limited, at 88 to 90 Hatton Garden, to store their goods over the long Passover and Easter holiday weekend. Many were immigrants, including Jewish Holocaust survivors. Many trusted the safe deposit with their life savings and kept their inventory there, without insurance, believing the boxes and the Chubb vault that protected them to be impenetrable. The neighbourhood, London's jewellery district since medieval times, has more than 300 jewellery stores, including De Beers. The Safe Deposit Company, which marketed itself as a reliable fortress, was the favoured place to store valuable gems. The handsome 7-story building itself hosted some 60 tenants, a majority of whom were in the jewellery trade, and stored their precious valuables in the basement safe deposit. The safe deposit had been a fixture in the neighbourhood stretching back decades, and its current owners were a Sudanese family of Indian heritage, called the Bavishis. Mahendra Bavishi, the 69-year-old pot-bellied family patriarch and director of the business, lived in Khartoum and had ceded the daily running of the company to his two sons, 38-year-old Manish and 29-year-old Alok. All three men had a 25% stake in the firm, along with Mahendra's wife, Aruna. Manish was on a 1-month vacation in Sudan with his wife during that long weekend, and so Alok was looking after the business. As it was, Manish had a number of businesses, helping his father import electrical goods to Sudan and exporting the hibiscus flower from Sudan to Europe and South America. He typically only dropped by the safe deposit once a week. The company had been losing money for years. To try to attract new customers, Manish had recently upgraded the monitoring system for the alarm and CCTV cameras, advertised the safe deposit in the Indian press, and created a new website, replete with spelling mistakes. But the 7-decades-old vault remained largely the same, and the explosion in customers he and his father had dreamed of never came. As a result, on that long holiday weekend, only 562 of the 999 safe deposit boxes were in use. Some customers, who had defaulted on their payment for the boxes, hadn't checked their boxes in 15 years, and white stickers with the words "Rent Overdue" were sporadically taped to boxes in the cavernous basement space. These being hard times, the number of security guards at the safe deposit had shrunk from 5 to 2, while the building had done away with a full-time night watchman. Nevertheless, Locke was confident that his long-time security guards, Kelvin Stockwell, a slow-moving and white-haired 60-year-old who had worked for the company for 20 years, and Kiefer Raymond Kamara, who had worked there more than a decade, had things under control. As the 2 security guards were preparing to leave for the night, Reader paid his bus fare with a special travel pass for senior citizens, registered to his long-time alias, Mr. T. McCarthy, and then began an 80-minute journey to Hatton Garden. As the 96 bus edged its way through the city, the tree-lined streets of Kent soon gave way to the capital's urban sprawl. If Reader and the gang could pull off the caper, his children and grandchildren would never have to work again, and he would go down among the London criminal fraternity as the master his contemporaries grudgingly revered. The enormity of what he and the others were about to attempt must have been flashing through his mind as the streets of London rushed by the bus's windows. There had been 3 years of due diligence. Things had already been set in motion. The others were counting on him, and there was no turning back now. After arriving at London's sprawling Waterloo East station, Reader exited the station at 6:31 p.m. It being the evening before a long Easter weekend, the station would have been thronging with people, and it took another half hour until Reader was able to transfer to the number 55 bus. He boarded at 7:02 p.m. For someone who had been accustomed to the solitary confines of a jail cell, it must have been a relief to escape the crowds. He got off at St. John Street, in the hip neighbourhood of Clerkenwell in central London, an area peppered by architecture studios, designer lofts, tech startups, and gastropubs, many of them spilling over with Guardian-reading media types. As Reader walked briskly on St. John Street in the direction of Hatton Garden, he passed by converted warehouses, inside of which dozens of 20-somethings would spend their days hunched over their sleek Macintosh computers. It was a fitting contrast for a villain about to commit the last great analog crime of the digital age. Reader had long suffered from migraines, according to friends, the product of his fall from a roof on a burglary job decades earlier when he had fractured his skull. He also suffered from a host of ailments, including back pains and arthritis, but on that day he was surely feeling sprightly. He decided to walk the final few blocks to his destination. This was going to be a big night. Chapter 1. The Inspiration of a Botched Crime. In late August 2010, on the Sunday of a bank holiday weekend, 4 men wearing high-visibility jackets arrived via a white van to Chatilla, a glittering jewellery boutique on Bond Street in London's posh Mayfair district. It was 9 a.m. After lugging their equipment out from the van, including a diamond-tipped drill and rolling trash cans, the thieves, disguised as maintenance men, used scaffolding outside the store to climb to the roof. From there they broke into the building and deactivated the alarm. Then they climbed down a disused elevator shaft. Once inside the vault, they used a diamond-tipped drill to try to break into a safe containing about £40 million, $61 million, worth of gems. To try to cover their traces, they stole one of the company's CCTV hard drives. Chatilla was a daring and attractive target. The company, which had its headquarters in Geneva and has been owned by a Lebanese family for 150 years, also has offices in Riyadh and Doha, and its Tony London branch caters to Hollywood celebrities, Saudi sheiks and Russian oligarchs. It famously created the 171-carat, heart-shaped sapphire and diamond necklace inspired by the Coeur de la Mer necklace Kate Winslet wore in the blockbuster film Titanic. Its vaults have also housed some of the world's most priceless and rare gemstones, including a flawless 87-carat diamond dubbed the Habsburg, one of a mere fistful of the world's known red diamonds, and an oval-shaped 62-carat ruby called the Burmese Excellence. More recently, the jeweller made the carefully crafted pearl and diamond earrings Amal Clooney, George Clooney's wife, wore to her wedding. Leading the gang of jewel thieves on that day, according to Scotland Yard, was Danny Jones, a marathon runner, then in his mid-50s, with a macho demeanour. Eccentric to the core, he obsessed about crime, and sometimes slept in his mother-in-law's dressing gown and a fez, accompanied by his dog, Rocket, according to friends. He was also an avid fortune-teller. An experienced burglar, his lithe physique as well as his agility and strength made him ideal for slithering through a hole in the wall or wielding a heavy drill big enough to bore through concrete. One of his criminal associates, Carl Wood, a sometime burglar who had known Jones for years, compared him to Walter Mitty, the James Thurber character, who daydreams on an epic scale and variously imagines himself as a fighter pilot battling with the Germans during the war, as a globally celebrated surgeon saving lives, and as a wily killer. Jones was not a violent man, but he had a similarly active fantasy life. He talked to Rocket, believing he could communicate with canines. He liked to sleep on the floor of his room in a military sleeping bag and urinate into a water bottle. Possessed of a sweet demeanour, but the vanity of a wannabe celebrity, Jones's white hair was always impeccably combed. He liked to talk like a gangster, peppering his East End Cockney slang with enough fucks and cunts to make even the most hardened criminal blanch. A fitness freak who never drank or smoked, he had a tendency to invent stories. Fellow thieves say he had a tendency to blab and tell everything to his common-law wife, Val, which was considered a liability among the criminal fraternity, since a bust-up with the missus could lead to her loosening her tongue, and then everyone would be in trouble. He could run 20 miles with a heavy army bag on his back. He liked to say to anyone who would listen that he was in the Army, Special Forces, and offered survival training sessions to officers who wanted to learn how to survive in hostile territory. His physical fitness was such that he probably could. While he was fibbing, he nevertheless had impressive skills that were handy in a burglary. He could contort his body with acrobatic virtuosity, hold his head under water long after it was advisable, walk with handstands down an entire city block, and run very, very fast. But on that particular long weekend, Jones's contortionist skills proved obsolete as he tried to drill into the safe before realizing that the drill itself was too short. Unable to get into the safe, the gang abandoned their initial plan. Instead, they ransacked a showroom and stole about £1 million, $1.5 million, in jewelry and precious stones, lugging it away in white containers and bags. Somewhere between 9 and 10 p.m., they fled. Recalling the crime, whose perpetrators had remained elusive for years, Philip Evans, who went on to prosecute the case, would later observe at the Shatilla trial that there were only a handful of thieves in London with the audacity to try to pull off such a brazen feat. There can be very few people who have the necessary skills, experience, and preparedness to carry out a crime with this level of high stakes, high reward, and high risk, he said. Very few people who have the contacts to dispose of such huge amounts of high-value property. Very few people who would even know how to begin the immensely difficult and complex task of burgling a highly secure jeweller's such as this one. Members of Shatilla's staff discovered the break-in on Tuesday after the holiday weekend, and Jones would later be connected to the crime via his DNA left on a glove at the scene of the crime. But as the men fled with less booty than they had hoped, the botched burglary had provided a cautionary tale. They had managed to spirit away about £1 million in jewels, but it had been a fraction of what could have been possible. The burglary had provided several lessons, including the virtue of breaking in on the Sunday of a long weekend when patches of central London were deserted. It also brought home the need to have the right-sized drill. But power tools aside, there was another big lesson. If you wanted to attempt a heist of this magnitude, a master thief was needed to help with the planning and execution. Chapter 2. The Making of a Master Thief. A Restless Pensioner. It was around the autumn of 2012, and Brian Reader was feeling restless, or at least, it seems, ready for a change. His wife, Lynn, a former accountant's assistant with wavy red hair and an easy sense of humour, had been the love of his life, the one person who centred him, even when he was living in a jail cell. A heavy smoker, she had died a few years earlier from lung cancer. Friends say her absence had left a heavy void. Reader was a widower, living in his imposing £640,000, about $1 million, house in Dartford, Kent, a county bordering London, known for its apple orchards and toney middle-class contentment. After having orchestrated some of the most renowned crimes of the century, he had been reduced to selling used cars from the driveway. He had always had a taste for the good life, but he had been out of the crime game for a while, and according to his friends, he complained that money was fast running out. Handsome and rugged in his youth, Reader now had wisps of thinning white hair and had been recently diagnosed with prostate cancer. Even without the cancer, the effects of aging were already taking their toll. He was prone to sudden tantrums, at least in the company of his fellow senior citizens, and his patience seemed brittle at best. But he could also be courteous and kind to a fault. For example, when faced with police officers or defence attorneys, whom had been a fixture throughout his life. A penchant for night-time burglaries meant he had been a very present and devoted father and husband. His abiding love for Lynn, his two children, Paul and Joanne, and his grandchildren, had been a crack in the tough emotional armour he had donned during the years of operating in the ruthless and sometimes violent world of London crime. But Lynn was gone. Paul, who worked in his used car business, and Joanne, who worked for Goldman Sachs, were grown up. They had their own lives and families. Asked what would motivate him to try one last job, a former criminal associate said he had been motivated by money and his children. He was close to his kids. He would give all the proceeds to his boy, and he'd have said to the boy, "Look after Joanne." You know what I mean? I don't suppose he was really into it for himself. Boredom also seemed to play a role. When not selling cars, he would meet old cronies to talk about the old times. But there was only so much time a man could spend reminiscing about the past with other aging villains at a Monday club. In any case, some of his so-called friends didn't actually seem to like him. While generous to his family, he never seemed to buy anyone a pint of beer. "He sits in that cafe and talks about all their yesterdays," his friend Terry Perkins, a fellow burglar with his own long rap sheet, said about Reader, grousing about his arrogance, his misplaced nostalgia, and his apparent stinginess. "Never bought a drink at the pub, and that's his intention there, you know," he complained. "Never buys fuck all." Danny Jones, a long-time acquaintance of Reader, was equally uncharitable about his old friend. "He's a fucking know-it-all, that's what he is, and anything he knows he's got wrong," he said of Reader. "Every bit of fucking work we've been on, he's fucked up." Yet for all of their complaints, Reader was an experienced thief and strategist, and had contacts for laundering gear that the other two lacked. As the firm began to take shape for one last ambitious career-topping caper, Reader was perhaps also possessed by a fearlessness born of age. What was there to lose? Let's see how Sherlock Holmes solves this one. When Reader was 32, law enforcement officials and former criminal associates say he was the leader of a gang of expert thieves known as the Millionaire Moles, who pulled off a now legendary robbery on the night of Saturday, September 11, in 1971. At that time, London, a burgeoning financial centre, was rife with burglaries, and there was an armed robbery every 5 days. This heist took place at 188 Baker Street, the northwest London street where the fictional detective Sherlock Holmes lived. To begin with, the gang rented a leather goods shop called Le Sac, a few stores away from the bank. Then, using cutting equipment, they burrowed a 40-foot tunnel underground, passing under a chicken takeout restaurant until the tunnel reached underneath the vault. The men dug over the course of 3 long weekends to avoid being overheard. On the day of the heist, they crawled through the tunnel only to discover that the vault's floor was protected by 3 foot of reinforced concrete. Undeterred, they used a thermic lance and then explosives to blow a hole through it, barely large enough to wiggle through. All the while, one member of the group stood watch on a nearby rooftop with a walkie-talkie, ready to alert the others if Scotland Yard showed up. Once inside, the gang ransacked 268 safety deposit boxes, walking away with valuables estimated at more than £500,000, $1.2 million, worth about £7 million, $9 million today, at the time Britain's largest bank robbery. They left a mocking message scrawled in graffiti on the walls of the bank vault. Let's see how Sherlock Holmes solves this one. Reader, through his lawyer, has denied having anything to do with Baker Street and was never tried for the crime. During the heist, an amateur radio enthusiast accidentally overheard the gang's every word, spoken on their walkie-talkies. He called the police, who initially did not take him seriously, according to Tony Lundy, a former Scotland Yard detective who was on duty in London's West End during the robbery and was called to the scene. When police eventually responded, they descended on 750 banks in the area, including the targeted Lloyds Bank, but Lundy said the thieves initially remained undetected. We visited every bank, but all were soundproof, and all the vaults were locked and on timers and couldn't be opened until Monday at 9 a.m. I was part of the team that went to Lloyds, but not one bank showed signs of breaking an entry. On Sunday, the thieves fled, and the heist was discovered the next day, unleashing a media frenzy. To this day, unsubstantiated rumors swirl that Reader and his gang of outlaws were hired by MI5, the Domestic Intelligence Service, to rob the vault because it contained in a safe deposit box compromising photographs of the late Princess Margaret, the sister of Queen Elizabeth II, in flagrante delicto. Perhaps even more insidious, a former member of the Baker Street gang said Reader and the others had discovered in a safe deposit box photographs of a conservative politician sexually abusing children, and had purposely spread the photographs on the floor of the vault in the hopes that police would find them. If they did, they were never exposed. The audacity of the Baker Street robbery arguably surpassed even the surprise attack on a post office train during the legendary Great Train Robbery of 1963. The crime was later immortalized in the 2008 film The Bank Job, featuring a car dealer, like Reader, who commits the crime as part of an elaborate setup. In real life, 4 men were eventually arrested, but not Reader. Had he been involved, he had been too wily to get caught. Reader's luck finally ran out in 1985 when he was sentenced to 9 years in prison for his role in helping to launder stolen gold from another brazen caper 2 years earlier at the Brinksmat security depot at London's Heathrow Airport, during which roughly £26 million, or about $36 million worth of gold bars, had been spirited away. Along the way, he was also implicated in a string of commercial burglaries, and, in an episode that would irreparably mark him, accused of the murder of an undercover police officer. But after having been released from prison in 1994, he was living a quiet life, or so it seemed. Neighbours next to his home in Dartford, Kent, say they seldom saw him leave the house. The house is bordered by a brick wall, a fence, and a dense row of bushes that seemed calculated to defend against the twitching curtains of nosy neighbours, of which there were plenty. A sign on the house's incongruously small wooden front door says, "No entry." It is a comical flourish for the home of a man notorious for his breaking and entry skills. Occasionally, neighbours would see him playing with his grandchildren through a crack in the vast hedges that obscured part of the front of the building. But in his middle-class suburban neighbourhood, whose one famous native son, Mick Jagger, had long since left, Reader was a low-key and enigmatic figure. No one seemed to know who he was, or about his past, or about what he now planned to do. He appeared to cultivate anonymity after decades of being known for the wrong reasons. "Dartford is a place you came to raise children and a family outside of London and want a quiet suburban middle-class life," said a neighbour. "I always thought it strange that they lived in one of the nicest houses in the neighbourhood, but they never seemed to work. No one knew where he got the money," she said. "They never mixed with the other neighbours. I always felt like something was happening behind closed doors." The making of the governor. Reader's storied criminal record began in 1950 at the age of 11, when he was arrested for stealing a can of fruit at a corner shop, according to police records. In the decades that followed, his name would crop up in some of the most headline-grabbing burglaries of the era. His speciality, breaking and entering, and later laundering stolen goods such as jewellery and gold. Born on February the 28th, 1939, in London Docklands, in the southeast of the capital, Reader came of age in an impoverished industrial area that has long attracted the criminal fraternity. The firstborn son of Doris, 19, and Harry Reader, 24, Reader's personality was formed during an era of food rationing and Nazi bombs, which inspired his dogged self-preservation. The Docklands hosted one of the biggest ports in the world, and local villains and villains in training would sneak in at night, pry open shipping containers, and steal whatever they could find. When he was a teenager, Reader's father abandoned the family, forcing him to become the man of the house and to be independent from an early age, even if that meant stealing. As the eldest, he also took on the role of breadwinner and was close to his two sisters and brother, for whom he became a father figure, according to a childhood friend. He left school at the age of 15 and did a number of menial jobs, including as a butcher and shoveling coal for the railway. At the age of 18, he faced his first judge at London's storied Old Bailey Criminal Court on attempted burglary charges. Shortly after, in 1958, he was conscripted for military service and joined the Royal Engineers, where he went through basic training and learned how to handle a gun. His army salary was a pittance, but a friend from that period recalled that he used part of the money to buy a motorcycle. After leaving the military, he worked as a driver for a while, and hungering to be his own boss, bought his own truck and started to transport goods such as fruit and vegetables and industrial supplies across the country. At the age of 24, Reader, just a couple of years out of the army, met Lynn Kidd, 4 years his junior. She was pretty, a horse lover, with a quick wit and inner toughness he recognized in himself. The two married in 1963 and soon had 2 children. Desperate to earn some real money to support his young family, Reader came under the tutelage of Bill Barrett, an experienced thief who was about a decade older, and tutored him on the finer points of breaking and entering, how to choose a target, how to break open a safe, and how to disappear.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?